The willow wren was twittering his thin little song, hidden in the dark selvage of the river bank. It was past 10 o'clock of the short midsummer night. Mole lay stretched on the bank, still panting from the stress of the fierce day, and waited for his friend to return. It was still too hot to think of staying indoors, so he lay on some cool dock leaves and thought over the past day and its doings. The rat's light footfall was presently heard approaching over the parched grass. "Oh, the blessed coolness," he said, and sat down, gazing thoughtfully into the river, silent and preoccupied. "You stayed to supper, of course," said the mole presently. "Simply had to," said the rat. "Otto wouldn't hear of my going before. You know how kind they always are. But it was clear to me they were very unhappy, though they tried to hide it. Mole, I'm afraid they're in trouble. Little Portly is missing again, and you know what a lot his father thinks of him." "Oh, what, that child?" said the mole lightly. "Well, suppose he is. Why worry about it? He's always straying off, getting lost and turning up again, but no harm ever comes to him. You may be sure some animal or other will come across him and bring him back again. Why, we found him ourselves, miles from home, and quite self-possessed and cheerful." "Yes, but this time it's more serious," said the rat gravely. "He's been missing for some days now, and the otters have hunted everywhere, high and low, without finding the slightest trace. And they've asked every animal too, for miles around, and no one knows anything. Otter's evidently more anxious than he'll admit. I got it out of him that young Portly hasn't learned to swim very well yet, and I can see he's thinking of the weir. That place always had a fascination for the child. And then there are, well, traps and things, you know. Otter's not the fellow to be nervous, and now he is nervous. When I left, he came out with me, said he wanted some air, and talked about stretching his legs, but I could see it wasn't that, so I drew him out. He said he was going to spend the night watching by the ford." "But why should Otter choose to watch there?" said the mole. "Well, it seems that it was there he gave Portly his first swimming lesson," continued the rat, "from that shallow gravelly spit near the bank. And it was there he used to teach him fishing, and there young Portly caught his first fish. The child loved that spot, and Otter thinks that if he came wandering back from wherever he is, if he is anywhere by now, poor little chap, he might make for the ford he was so fond of. So Otter goes there every night and watches." They were silent for a time, both thinking of the same thing, the lonely, heart-sore animal crouched by the ford, watching and waiting the long night through. "Well," said the rat presently, "I suppose we ought to be thinking about turning in." But he didn't move. "Rat," said the mole, "I simply can't turn in and go to sleep and do nothing. We'll get the boat out and paddle upstream. The moon will be up in an hour or so, and then we'll search as well as we can." "Just what I was thinking myself," said the rat. "It's not the sort of night for bed anyhow, and daybreak is not so very far away, and then we may pick up some news of him from early risers as we go along." They got the boat out, and the rat took the sculls, paddling with caution. Out in midstream there was a clear, narrow track that faintly reflected the sky. But wherever shadows fell on the water from bank, bush or tree, they appeared as solid as the banks themselves, and Mole had to steer with judgment accordingly. Dark and deserted as it was, the night was full of small noises, song and chatter and rustling. The water's own noises, too, were more apparent than by day. Its gurglings and gloops, more unexpected and near at hand. And constantly they started at what seemed a sudden, clear call from an actual voice. At last, over the rim of the waiting earth, the moon lifted with slow majesty till it swung clear of the horizon and rode off, free of moorings. And once more they began to see surfaces, meadows and quiet gardens, and the river itself from bank to bank, all washed clean of mystery and terror, all radiant again as by day. Fastening their boat to a willow, the friends landed in this silent silver kingdom, and patiently explored the hedges, the hollow trees, the ditches and dry waterways. Embarking again and crossing over, they worked their way up the stream in this manner, while the moon, serene and detached in a cloudless sky, did what she could to help them in their quest, till her hour came and she sank earthwards, and mystery once more held field and river. Then a change began slowly to declare itself. The horizon became clearer, field and tree came more into sight, and the mystery began to drop away from them. A bird piped suddenly and was still, and a light breeze sprang up and set the reeds and the bulrushes rustling. Rat, who was in the stern of the boat while Mole sculled, sat up suddenly and listened with passionate intensity. Mole, who with gentle strokes was just keeping the boat moving while he scanned the banks, looked at him with curiosity. "It's gone," sighed the rat, sinking back into his seat. "So beautiful and strange and new. I almost wish I had never heard it, for it has roused a longing in me that is pain, and nothing seems worthwhile but just to hear that sound and go on listening to it for ever and ever." "No, there it is again," he cried. Entranced, he was silent for a long space, spellbound. "Now it passes on, and I begin to lose it," he said. "Oh, Mole, the beauty of it, the merry bubble and joy, the thin, clear, happy call of the distant piping. Row on, Mole, row, for the music and the call must be for us." The Mole, greatly wondering, obeyed. "I hear nothing myself," he said, "but the wind playing in the reeds and the rushes." The rat didn't answer, if indeed he heard. Rapt, transported, trembling, he was possessed in all his senses by this new divine thing. In silence, Mole rowed steadily, and soon they came to a point where the river divided, a long backwater branching off to one side. With a slight movement of his head, Rat, who had long dropped the rudder lines, directed the rower to take the backwater. The creeping tide of light gained and gained, and now they could see the colour of the flowers that gemmed the water's edge. "Clearer and nearer still," cried the rat. "Now you must surely hear it." "At last I see you do." Breathless and transfixed, the Mole stopped rowing as the liquid run of that glad piping broke on him like a wave, caught him up and possessed him utterly. He saw the tears on his comrade's cheeks and bowed his head and understood. For a space they hung there, brushed by the purple loosestrife that fringed the bank. Then the clear melody imposed its will on Mole, and mechanically he bent to the oars again. And the light grew steadily stronger, but no bird sang, as they were wont to at dawn, and but for the heavenly music, all was still. Then the murmur of the approaching weir began to hold the air. A wide half-circle of foam and shining shoulders of green water, the great weir closed the backwater from bank to bank, troubled all the quiet surface with twirling eddies, and deadened all other sounds with its solemn and soothing rumble. In midmost of the stream, a small island lay anchored, fringed close with willow and silver birch and alder. Slowly, but with no doubt or hesitation whatever, the two animals passed through the broken, tumultuous water and moored their boat at the flowery margin of the island. In silence they landed and pushed through the blossom and scented herbage that led up to the level ground, till they stood on a little lawn, set around with crabapple, wild cherry and sloe. "This is the place of my song dream, the place the music played to me," whispered the rat, as if in a trance. "Here, in this holy place, here, if anywhere, surely we shall find him." Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head, and rooted his feet to the ground. And without seeing, he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. And still there was utter silence in the bird-haunted branches, and still the light grew and grew. Perhaps he would never have dared to raise his eyes, but that, though the piping was now hushed, the call and the summons seemed still dominant and imperious. Trembling, he obeyed and raised his humble head. And then, in that utter clarity of the imminent dawn, while nature seemed to hold her breath, he looked into the very eyes of the friend and helper, saw the backward sweep of the curved horns gleaming in the growing daylight, saw the stern hooked nose between the kindly eyes that were looking down on them humorously, while the bearded mouth broke into a half-smile at the corners, saw the rippling muscles on the arm that lay across the broad chest, the long supple hand still holding the panpipes, only just fallen away from the parted lips, saw the splendid curves of the shaggy limbs disposed in majestic ease on the grass, saw, last of all, nestling between his very hooves, sleeping soundly in entire peace and contentment, the little round, podgy form of the baby otter. All this he saw, for one moment, breathless and intense, vivid on the morning sky. "Rat," he whispered, "are you afraid?" "Afraid?" murmured the rat, his eyes shining with love. "Afraid of him? Oh, never, never." And yet, oh no, I am afraid. Then, crouching to the earth, the two animals bowed their heads in silent homage. Sudden and magnificent, the sun's broad golden disk showed itself over the horizon facing them, and the first rays, shooting across the level water meadows, took the animals full in the eyes and dazzled them. When they were able to look once more, the vision had vanished. and the air was full of the carol of birds that hailed the dawn. As they stared blankly in dumb misery, a capricious little breeze, dancing up from the surface of the water, blew lightly and caressingly into their faces, and with its soft touch came instant oblivion. Mole rubbed his eyes and stared at Rat, who was looking about him in a puzzled sort of way. I beg your pardon, Rat, what did you say? He asked. I think I was only remarking, said Rat slowly, that this was the right sort of place, and that here, if anywhere, we should And look! Why, there he is, the little fellow! And with a cry of delight, he ran towards the slumbering Portly. Portly woke up with a joyous squeak and wriggled with pleasure at the sight of his father's friends. In a moment, however, his face grew blank, and he fell to hunting around in a circle with a pleading whine. Round the island the little otter searched and searched, till at last the black moment came for giving up and sitting down and crying bitterly. The mole ran quickly to comfort the little animal, but Rat, lingering, looked long and doubtfully at certain hoof marks deep in the turf. Some great animal has been here, he murmured, and stood musing. Come along, Rat, called the mole. Think of poor Otter waiting up there by the ford. Portly was soon comforted by the promise of a jaunt on the river in Mr. Rat's real boat. The two animals placed him securely between them in the bottom of the boat and paddled off down the backwater. The sun was fully up by now and hot on them. Birds sang lustily and flowers smiled from either bank. The main river reached again, they turned the boat's head upstream, where they knew their friend was keeping his lonely vigil. As they drew near the familiar ford, the mole took the boat into the bank, and they lifted Portly out and set him on his legs on the towpath. They gave him a friendly farewell pat on the back and shoved out into midstream. They watched the little animal as he waddled along the path contentedly, watched him till they saw his muzzle suddenly lift, as he quickened his pace with shrill whines and wriggles of recognition. Looking up the river, they could see Otter start up, tense and rigid, from out of the shallows, and they could hear his amazed and joyous bark as he bounded up through the bulrushes onto the path. Then the mole, with a strong pull on one oar, swung the boat round and let the full stream bear them down again, whither it would. Their quest now happily ended.